Hello, and welcome to Investment Insight, your clear take on the markets. Let's get started. I am genuinely thrilled you're spending time with us today because we have a rather ambitious mission for this deep dive.
We definitely do. It's a big one today.
Yeah, it really is. Our goal is to take three massive tectonic shifts happening in the global economy right this very minute and break them down into bite-sized, incredibly easy to understand pieces. So no confusing Wall Street jargon, no getting lost in some maze of economic theory. We are just going to look at the core facts.
Right, and figure out what they actually mean for your wallet, your investments, and just your general understanding of the world. Because, the global economy usually feels like this massive, tangled web of competing interests.
Oh, absolutely. It's overwhelming for most people.
But the truth is, when you start to pull on a few specific threads, you quickly realize how deeply connected everything is. So today, we're focusing on some of the most complex geopolitical and financial stories dominating the news cycle, but we are going to untangle them so the underlying machinery actually makes sense.
Exactly. So let's look at the board. According to recent data and market analysis, there are three primary global events playing out right now that are essentially resetting all the rules. First, the European Central Bank has made a sudden, massive U-turn on their interest rate strategy.
Which caught a lot of people off guard.
It really did. Second, over in Asia, China has rolled out a new financial playbook that is surprisingly cautious. Economists are having to completely recalibrate their expectations. And third, bringing it back home to the U.S., we are going to examine the actual hidden legal mechanics behind why the Trump administration is pushing new global tariffs right in the middle of a major geopolitical conflict.
I mean, it sounds like a lot of heavy lifting. But these three events are essentially the new pillars of global trade and finance right now. Grasping the why behind these moves gives you a significant advantage in navigating whatever the markets throw at us next.
Yeah, that context is everything. So let's jump right into the first pillar, Europe's energy shock and the European Central Bank, or the ECB. Just a short while ago, the broad consensus was that the ECB was definitively going to cut interest rates.
Right. Everyone thought borrowing was supposed to get cheaper.
Exactly. But suddenly, recent data shows the market is aggressively betting they will hold rates steady or possibly even hike them. It's a complete whiplash scenario. So why the sudden panic in the European markets?
Well, a lot of casual observers just glance at the price of crude oil. Right? They see Brent crude hovering around $83 or $84 a barrel, and they assume that's the whole story.
Sure, because gas prices at the pump are what we notice every day.
Exactly. But oil is actually just a distraction here. The real panic, the thing keeping European central bankers awake at night, is centered on liquid natural gas, or LNG. The ongoing war involving Iran has severely disrupted LNG production facilities and the vital shipping routes required to get that gas into Europe.
Okay, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this, because central bank policy can get pretty dense. If I'm looking at this inflation problem, it feels a bit like a grease fire in a kitchen.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Right. So the ECB thought they had successfully smothered the flames. They put the fire extinguisher back in the cabinet and were just about to turn on the air conditioning to cool the room down. And that AC represents the interest rate cuts that stimulate the economy.
Right, cooling off the financial pressure.
But suddenly, a brand new grease spill happens. And this time, it's a massive disruption in natural gas coming from the Middle East. If they turn on the AC now, it's just going to blow those new flames everywhere. So they have to keep the extinguisher out. Am I looking at this the right way?
A Kachu fire analogy actually holds up really well.
Yeah.
But the added layer of urgency here is that they aren't just trying to cool down an empty kitchen. They are actively trying to cook a massive feast while the stove is malfunctioning.
Oh.
Yeah, to put some hard numbers to this panic, European gas prices jumped roughly 50% in an incredibly short window.
50%. That is a massive spike.
It's brutal. And the timing is even worse. Europe is currently entering what analysts call a summer storage race. They don't just need gas for today. They desperately need to secure about 700 cargoes of liquid natural gas over the summer just to build up their reserves so their citizens don't freeze the following winter.
That's terrifying. 700 cargoes.
And right now, their storage levels are sitting dangerously below average.
A 50% price jump when you are desperate to buy 700 cargoes of fuel is catastrophic. That is a massive budget, completely blown out of the water.
Which explains exactly why the major financial institutions are scrambling to rewrite their forecasts. Morgan Stanley is a prime example of this.
What did they do?
They completely threw out their previous prediction that the ECB would cut rates in 2026. They've shifted entirely to a hold prediction. The ECB is well aware that a temporary energy shock can't simply be magically fixed by tweaking interest rates.
Right, because you can't just print more natural gas.
Exactly. But when an energy shock of this magnitude hits, it drives up the cost of electricity. That makes running a manufacturing plant more expensive, which makes everyday goods and services more expensive. It triggers a secondary wave of inflation that central banks absolutely cannot ignore.
And here's the ripple effect that I find truly fascinating about all this. Normally, the traditional Wall Street playbook says that when a war breaks out or there's global panic, you buy government bonds.
Right, the classic flight to safety.
Yeah, they are the ultimate safe haven for your money when the world gets scary. But looking at the trading data, bond markets are not acting like safe havens at all right now.
The historical precedent is definitely broken at the moment. Usually, a geopolitical crisis triggers a rush into bonds, which drives bond yields down. But the fear of inflation is so deeply entrenched right now that long-term interest rates are actually rising.
So the panic over prices is beating out the panic over the war.
Precisely. The market isn't just worried about a war. The market is terrified of stagflation.
And for our listeners who might not, read economics textbooks on the weekend, stagflation is essentially the worst case scenario, right?
It really is the ultimate economic headache. Stagflation occurs when you have economic growth slowing down to a crawl, that's the stagnation part, while the everyday prices of groceries, gas, and goods keep skyrocketing. That's the inflation.
So you're making less money or losing your job, but everything costs more.
Exactly. If you are watching your retirement account, this is a massive shift. The old strategy of hiding in bonds during a crisis isn't working because the fear of inflation eating away your purchasing power is currently overpowering the fear of the geopolitical conflict itself.
Wow. Okay, so while Europe is scrambling to keep the lights on and the factories running without sparking a massive inflation fire, over in Asia, China is dealing with almost the exact opposite problem. Let's pivot to our second topic.
Sounds good.
China recently wrapped up its National People's Congress. That's their huge annual legislative session where they reveal their economic game plan. And a lot of Western analysts were heavily betting on China firing off a massive bazooka of economic stimulus to rescue their slumping real estate market and, force consumers to start spending again.
That was definitely the expectation on Wall Street.
But recent analysis reveals that instead of a bazooka, Premier Li Qiang announced a very restrained, modest expansion.
The lack of a massive stimulus flood definitely caught some investors off guard. But if we look under the hood at their long-term structural goals, this cautious approach actually makes a lot of strategic sense.
Let me test another analogy on you to see if I'm interpreting their strategy correctly.
Go for it.
It feels like China's economy is a massive, sprawling house under renovation. Instead of the government taking out one giant, reckless bank loan to build a flashy new swimming pool in the backyard, which would represent that indiscriminate stimulus bazooka, they're taking out very specific, calculated long-term mortgages.
Okay, I see where you're taking this.
And they are using that money to rip open the walls, fix the rotting plumbing, and upgrade the home with smart technology. They are ignoring the flashy curb appeal to do the unglamorous structural work. Does that track with the data?
The renovation comparison is spot on, especially when we look at the actual receipts for this project. Let's break down the numbers, but we'll translate them into a context that makes sense for an American listener so we don't get lost in a sea of massive foreign figures.
Yes, please. Keep it simple.
First, their overall budget deficit is being kept at about 4% of their GDP. That comes out to 5.89 trillion yuan, which is an increase of just 230 billion yuan from the previous year.
Which, in the grand scheme of national budgets, is practically a rounding error. It's a very tight leash.
It's highly controlled. Now, regarding those smart technology upgrades in your analogy, the government is issuing 1.3 trillion yuan in what they call ultra-long special treasury bond.
Ultra long. Okay, how much is that in dollars?
To put that in perspective, that's roughly 180 billion US dollars. It's a significant amount of money, but it is surgically targeted. They aren't using this to pour concrete for empty apartment buildings.
Right, no more ghost cities.
Exactly. 800 billion of that is explicitly earmarked for national security and strategic technological independence. Another $250 billion is funding consumer trade-in programs.
So they are essentially subsidizing everyday citizens to upgrade their old refrigerators, washing machines, or cars, which stimulates their domestic manufacturing base organically from the ground up.
Exactly the goal. But the most revealing part of their strategy is how they are handling that rotting plumbing you mentioned. They are issuing 4.4 trillion yuan, which is over $600 billion in local government special bonds.
Okay, that's a huge number. Where is that going?
The critical detail is hidden in the official policy language. The central government explicitly stated this money is to replace hidden debts and clear overdue payments.
I want to pause right there because hidden debt sounds a bit, well, nefarious. What does that actually look like on the ground for a regular business in China?
Think of it like a local city hall that borrowed heavily off the books to hit aggressive growth targets. And now they are so broke they can't even pay the local paving company that fixed their roads.
Oh, wow. So regular businesses just aren't getting paid.
Right. Local municipalities across China have accumulated a mountain of this off-the-books debt, owing billions to private contractors and small businesses. By issuing these special bonds, Beijing is essentially bailing out these local governments.
So they are providing the cash to pay off those hidden debts so that local economies can actually function and businesses can get paid. That really is removing a massive clog in the financial plumbing.
Exactly. And it seems they're trying to get the private sector to do some of the heavy lifting, too. They've created an 800 billion yuan policy finance tool and a 100 billion yuan special fund.
So what do those funds actually do? Are they just more government handouts?
Not at all. Those funds are designed to be a private money magnet. China knows it can't fund everything directly, so the government puts up a fraction of the capital, maybe offers some risk guarantees, and uses that as leverage to coax private investors off the sidelines to fund the rest.
It's an efficiency play.
Exactly.
Yeah.
China has officially lowered its economic growth target to between 4.5 and 5%. The era of double-digit explosive growth is behind them, so every single dollar, or yuan, has to be deployed with maximum efficiency.
So keeping our summary tight here so we don't lose the forest for the trees. China is actively avoiding the big stimulus bazooka. Instead, they are methodically spending to pay off local debts, forcing capital into high-tech independence, and trying to leverage private investment.
You nailed it. It's a calculated bet on long-term structural stability over short-term market sugar highs.
All right, let's bring the focus back home to the United States for our third and final topic, the ticking legal clock behind the new U.S. tariffs. Now, before we get into the weeds here, I want to be crystal clear with you, our listener.
This is an important disclaimer.
It is. We're going to be discussing the Trump administration and specific political policies. Our goal is absolutely not to endorse any viewpoint, take any political sides, or preach about ethics. We are strictly and impartially reporting on the mechanics of the policies based on the latest data and legal analysis so you can clearly understand the economic reality of what is heading toward your wallet.
That's a vital distinction. Our job is to lift the hood, look at the engine, and explain how the gears of international trade law are currently turning.
With that established, let's look at the numbers out of Washington. Data shows that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is floating a 15% global baseline tariff, with some specific sectors potentially facing tariffs as high as 50%.
Those are massive numbers.
Huge. Naturally, a lot of folks are looking at the headlines, seeing the chaotic conflict in the Middle East disrupting shipping, and asking a very logical question: why introduce massive, chaotic tariffs right in the middle of a global war that is already stressing out supply chains?
It really seems counterintuitive on the surface. But the legal filings reveal that the timing of these tariffs is not primarily a reaction to the war. It is driven by a very loud, very fast-ticking legal clock inside the U.S. government.
Okay, let's try one more automotive analogy to make sense of this legal maneuvering. Tell me if I have the mechanics right here.
I'm ready.
Imagine your car's engine belt, which represents the old tariff laws, suddenly snaps while you were doing 70 on the highway. It snapped because a mechanic representing the U.S. Supreme Court inspected it and declared it legally faulty.
Right.
Now, you happen to be driving through a massive, dangerous rainstorm, which represents the current geopolitical war. You are forced to use duct tape right now, right this second, just to keep the car running. That duct tape gets you down the road to a shop where you can finally install a permanent, heavy-duty steel engine belt.
That analogy highlights the sheer desperation of the timeline perfectly. Let's look at the broken belt part of that. The U.S. Supreme Court recently voided the previous tariffs that were built on the IEPA.
And for those who don't read trade law for fun, what does IEPA stand for?
It stands for the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. It's a law that gives the president broad authority to regulate commerce during a national emergency.
Okay, so what happened when the Supreme Court struck it down?
When the court struck down the use of that specific law for these tariffs, it didn't just prevent future collections. It ripped open a terrifying legal void. There became a very real, immediate risk that the U.S. government might be legally forced to refund over $175 billion in tariffs they had already collected.
Wait, $175 billion. I get stressed when I owe the IRS a minor penalty.
Right.
I cannot fathom the absolute panic in the Treasury Department realizing they might have to cut checks totaling $175 billion to importing companies. That is a crater in the federal budget.
It is a financial nightmare scenario for any administration. So to stop the bleeding instantly, they couldn't wait for Congress to slowly debate a new law. They had to grab the duct tape.
And what is the duct tape in this scenario?
In this specific case, the duct tape was instantly triggering Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. This is a somewhat obscure legal mechanism that allows the president to unilaterally impose a temporary 15% global tariff to deal with severe balance of payments issues.
Okay, but there's a catch.
A big one.
No.
It only lasts for 150 days. It's strictly a temporary bridge.
So the 15% tariff dominating the news cycle isn't even the final plan. It is literally just the duct tape holding the budget together while the clock counts down from 150 days.
Exactly. Which brings us to the steel belt. Treasury Secretary Besant has stated they will use this 150-day window to legally establish much more permanent, durable tariffs. They plan to anchor these new tariffs using two different legal tools, Section 301 and Section 232.
Let's break those down really quickly.
Sure. Section 301 is essentially the government's weapon for fighting unfair trade practices, like if another country is subsidizing their industries unfairly or stealing intellectual property.
Got it. And Section 232?
Section 232 is the national security button.
And here is where the geopolitics gets incredibly ironic and where that rainstorm in our analogy comes back into play. The war in the Middle East actually strengthens the government's legal argument for hitting that national security button.
It provides a massive amount of legal cover. Historically, using Section 232 to impose tariffs on everyday goods can be a really tough case to prove in court.
Because it's hard to argue that a washing machine is a matter of national security.
Exactly. But because the conflict in the Middle East is actively disrupting global energy supplies and threatening major shipping arteries like the Strait of Hormuz, the administration can walk into a courtroom and argue that relying on foreign supply chains is fundamentally dangerous.
They can argue that protecting domestic supply chains isn't just about boosting jobs. It is a matter of pure, undeniable national security.
Yes. The chaos of the war gives them the perfect legal justification to make those steel belt tariffs permanent.
So we always want to bring this back to the listener. What does this ticking legal clock and this web of trade law actually mean for the person pushing a cart through a grocery store or buying parts for their small business?
Global logistics giants like DHL are already waving massive red warning flags for the consumer market. They are cautioning that when you combine fluctuating duct tape tariff laws with wartime spikes in ocean shipping and insurance costs, you get absolute chaos for global supply chains.
And businesses hate chaos.
They do. The businesses importing these goods are faced with a stark reality. They will either have to eat those rising costs themselves, which means shrinking profit margins, pausing expansion, or cutting jobs, or, as is almost always the case, they're going to pass those costs directly onto you at the checkout line.
The legal maneuvering in Washington sounds really abstract, but the end result is very real. When the cost of moving a shipping container goes up, the price of everything inside it goes up.
It's that simple.
So what does this all mean when we zoom out? Let's take a step back and look at the massive picture we've painted today. Whether it is the European Central Bank fighting a new gas-fueled inflation fire and abandoning their plans to make borrowing cheaper, or China quietly, methodically fixing its internal financial plumbing and absorbing hidden debts instead of firing off a flashy stimulus bazooka.
Right.
Or the United States using temporary legal duct tape to rebuild its tariff walls under the banner of national security. The common thread here is impossible to ignore. The era of smooth, predictable, frictionless global economics is officially over. Policy is no longer driven by simple supply and demand. It is now being actively driven by energy logistics, hidden debts, and ticking legal clocks.
It really is a new world. And that reality brings up a rather profound question, which is what I want to leave you with to ponder today.
I'd love to hear it.
We are watching Europe desperately hunt for basic gas just to keep their grid online. We're watching China aggressively hoard its long-term capital for its own tech independence. And we're watching the U.S. weaponize trade laws under the banner of national security.
Yeah, everyone is turning inward.
Exactly. So the provocative thought is this. Are we witnessing the permanent end of a unified, interconnected global market? Are we entering a new era where the everyday prices you pay are decided not by the efficiency of free trade, but by regional fortresses pulling up their drawbridges and securing their own borders first?
It is a heavy question, and one that will undoubtedly shape your investments, your career, and the global markets for years to come. Well, that is all the time we have for today's deep dive. We hope this helped clear the fog and gave you a much better understanding of the forces shaping our world right now. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button.